to understand what is really happening in Latin America, particularly in Mexico and in Colombia. Because we hear all about the drugs, right? The drug flow, the drug dealers, but we need to understand why this is happening and what is the role of the police of the United States in all these phenomena. So, as you might know, in recent days, an extermination site was discovered in the Mexican state of Jalisco, in Teuchitlán, near the city of Guadalajara. Hundreds of pairs of shoes, clothing, bone fragments, and ovens were found. The site was used for the forced recruitment and training of cartel soldiers, as well as torturing victims and cremating their remains. It was uncovered by a collective of people called Guerreros Buscadores de Jalisco. Now the difficult task remains to identify all these fragmented bones. It is estimated that just in Jalisco, 15,000 people are disappeared. I would like to observe a minute of silence in remembrance of the known victims of this site. Unfortunately, similar events have occurred before. For example, in Tamaulipas, where 193 people, mostly migrants, were killed. There is an intrinsic connection between forced disappearances, the so-called drug war, and migration. The actors connected through this network are not just the criminal networks, are also the governments, both of Mexico and the United States. To understand how the US government is tied to the Latin governments, we need to examine three initiatives that were created by the US in the beginning of the century in relation with the Latin American governments. This is called the Plan Colombia, the Plan Merida, and the Central America Regional Security Initiative. These programs are presented to the public as foreign aid from the United States to Colombia, Mexico, and Central America. However, their true objective is not to ensure security, but to enforce US economic capitalist interests through three main strategies. First of all, through policy changes imposed on Latin American governments, through formal militarization of Latin American governments, and through paramilitarization as a consequence of militarization. So let's begin with formal militarization. A significant aspect of US foreign policy in Latin America is to form or to support the police, what they call police professionalization. These called police assistants achieve many of the same objectives as a military intervention while appearing less political. However, instead of improving security in Mexico and in Colombia, it has only intensified violence. For instance, in the state of Chihuahua, the annual homicide rate increased from 586 deaths to more than 4,000 after 2011, after we received support from the US. This surge of violence is ultimately affecting business interests. How? Because multinationals and large corporations are largely unaffected by this instability. Cartel practices like extortion predominantly target small businesses, the ones that are started by local people. The war on drugs functions like a herbicide. It kills small weeds, meaning small companies. And they leave the big ones in place, coming from the US. So this is the modus operandi. Militarized police, because remember, the police receives money from the US, create security corridors for multinationals to operate freely while simultaneously suppressing local dissent, under the pretext of combating narco-trafficking. The United States has facilitated the militarization of Mexican society, further escalating violence. And then comes paramilitarization. For example, in Colombia, violence has led to the depopulation of entire regions. People are forced to migrate. This is the reason of migration. People are forced to migrate because of the policies the US is enforcing in our region. And then these lands are empty. What happened with empty lands? They are taken for extractive projects. For example, for cultivation of palm oil, to extract minerals, but also hydrocarbons. For instance, in the Department of Putumayo in Colombia, the US military carried out fumigation campaigns to supposedly destroy the fields, which basically these fields are also sometimes cultivated by people who are subsisting. Not only did this campaign fail to reduce the availability of cocaine in the United States, but they also paved the way for increased oil exploration by multinational corporations in this area. The third strategy is the policy change in Latin America, because both Plan Colombia and Plan Mérida come with significant policy changes that open key sectors of the state, such as energy and taxation, to private investment and powerful transnational monopolies. If militarization acts as a herbicide, then this policy change is the water that nourishes and sustains the system. In Mexico, for example, these policies led to the opening of the national oil company Pemex to foreign investment, an outcome accelerated by the so-called drug war. And I don't know if you know, but 2 days ago, Claudia Sheinbaum, the president, just reverses. I don't know how this will develop further, but this is not in the text because this is just something that happened just now. Another form of organization target is the ejido. Ejido is communal lands farmed by individual families with certain areas used collectively. After these agreements, the trade agreements which are open because of drug war, ejido lands will be converted into fee simple land, making them vulnerable to privatization. Following financial reforms pushed under the guise of the drug war, these lands will be seized for debt repayment, allowing institutions like banks to become major land owners. In conclusion, in his book, The Labyrinth of Solitude, Octavio Paz argues that to understand the Mexican Revolution, the first major revolution of the 20th century, we must see it as an unfinished event. It's something that is ongoing. The events that we are witnessing today, the drug war, migration, enforced disappearances, represent a counter-revolution driven by capitalism and backed by the United States. This counter-revolution is devastating communities and dismantling the few gains from the Mexican Revolution that survived the signing of free trade agreements with the US and Canada. Meanwhile, many of us navigate this reality without fully understanding what is happening. Our perspectives shaped by pop culture portrayals like Narcos and Emilia Perez. I call on all Latin American people, let us reclaim control over our own popular revolution. Let us take charge of our own destiny. Zapata vive, la lucha sigue.
Zapata vive, la lucha sigue.
Tierra y libertad. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido.
El pueblo
Unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido.
El pueblo
unido jamás será vencido.
Gracias.